There were indicators that these things were being intelligently controlled, and that there was some sort of intelligence, life that was controlling these things. Not necessarily, you know, a body, so to speak.
Aliens may exist in ways we cannot even fathom, and they could be all around us, but we may simply not be seeing what's right in front of us, says Luis Elizondo, a former Pentagon official who was in charge of the Pentagon UFO program, ATIP.
We invest millions of dollars each year trying to find some sort of life, either within our solar system or within our galaxy, whether it be technosignatures or microbial life on Mars or whatever. We're trying to find life out there. What if that life found us first? I mean, when you look at the age of this planet and how long this planet has been here and how long life forms have been here, is it possible that something else found us first?
Our traditional conception of space is limited by our brain, and we may have the signs above and be unable to see them.
It's very tempting for us to all go down the rabbit hole very quickly and think we have the answer. I see it all the time. And my word of caution to that is please, please, please try your best to be victim of your own analytic bias. I suffer from it just like everybody else. I'm no superhero. I had the same challenges when I see something. I had this temptation to jump to a conclusion. Oh, it must be that. And that's the way the human brain is wired. That's a human thing. The very first thing we do coming out of our mother's womb is we recognize her sound and her face and her touch. We are programmed as a species to recognize patterns and identify friend or foe. That is what nature has evolved us to be. And so it's natural that when you come up to an enigma like this and you get some answers, that we want to jump to conclusions of what something is or is not. But we really have to be very careful and not be tempted to do that prematurely. We really need to let the scientific process and methodologies work. And I think once we can do that, we may have some surprisingly simple answers.
Luis Elizondo states that there are signatures that we have on this planet of living things. This phenomenon could represent a parallel form of life from here or from outside Earth that interacts with the environment in a different way than we do.
We live in a three-dimensional world where time is a function of the fourth dimension, if you will. And we experience time as being linear. It's a linear function or process. But we now know in the quantum world that, first of all, we know that space and time, because of the work of Einstein and others, that space and time are joined together. And we know that space-time is flexible. It's called relativity. We see it around massive objects all the time, not just Earth, but the sun, black holes. So the linear universe that we experience to some degree really isn't. And when you look at the quantum state of things, even an electron, for example, you learn in high school that an electron orbits an atom. And we now know that's really a very simplistic way of looking at things. The electron doesn't orbit around the atom. In fact, it's called an electron cloud because the electron is both all in all places and none of the places all at the same time.
Elizondo says the past, present, and the future overlap, and there isn't always an even transition between them, and uses a cigarette burning as a metaphor.
My point being is that if you were to look at time and think of a cigarette burning, when you look at the notion of the future, most people would define the future as those events that have not yet happened. And the past is defined by events that have already happened. And when you look at that construct, then the definition of the present must be a moment in space-time, probably measured in Planck time, very infinitesimally small moment of space-time where the future is transitioning into the past. It's not a point in time. It's a process. It's an event that's occurring. So a way to look at that in lay perspective is think of a cigarette. That parts of the cigar that have already burnt, or the cigarette that have already burnt, the ash, is the past. That part of the cigarette or cigar that has not yet burned is the future. And the cherry, that moment of ignition, that spark of where the future is now getting consumed and becoming the past, that is the present. And we as human beings, we live at that moment. All of our hopes, our fears, our memories, love, hate, good, bad, all that is an expression of an experience that occurs at an infinitesimally small moment of space-time. Like I said, probably measured in plane time. That is how we experience the present. But what if there were things that had the ability to experience where the present was a much bigger cherry, if you will, a much bigger transition where more elements of the future and the past are experienced as in the present? What if there were species out there that experience the universe with an extra level of dimension? Is it possible that maybe some of these things, these UAP, have the ability, we experience them when they are right here, right now, and every other time we don't, because we're simply not intersecting with that extra dimensional space of time? You know, when you look at that cigarette or cigar burning, you'll notice that it never burns evenly. When you look at it up close and you can kind of remove the glare and the flare from the burn, we realize that there are portions of the future, of the portions of the cigar that haven't burned yet, behind portions of the cigar that already has burned. It's not an even burn. There's an overlap, right? And quantum theory is beginning to show some of the models for that. So I know I'm going in a very long-winded, roundabout way to answer your question about what I meant about mankind, but I guess my answer to that is it's limitless. Every time we put a limitation on Mother Nature, she defies our box. She defies the parameters for which we set. Every time we say every living thing needs water or oxygen, we realize that there are microbial life out there that are anaerobic. In fact, they'll die if you put oxygen. They like a non-oxygenated environment, right? You have these extremophiles living at the bottom of the ocean and miles below the Arctic ice. So I think we need to be very cautious how we define life. A long time ago, we used to define life as mammals, birds, and fish. Well, that's probably a very oversimplistic view of what life is. We're spending billions of dollars through NASA trying to find microbial life right now on some of our planets in our own solar system and moons, because we think that there's a very good possibility that exists. SETI does the same thing with radio transmissions, trying to find a signature of life out there. And what we're beginning to find out is that it is more likely than not that there is life out there, and that life might be fairly abundant.
He talks about a new project with the Lakota tribe and references their oral history being consistent with what we are witnessing today.
Most indigenous peoples have oral traditions that go back, in some cases, thousands and thousands of years, prehistory from our perspective. And to very much the same that an F-18 pilot is a trained observer flying a combat mission, indigenous people are trained observers when it comes to their land. And although it might come from a slightly different paradigm than we're used to in the Western world, indigenous people have a profound sense of history. It is that history that we are very curious to see if we can see some of the same patterns that we see in the current effort regarding ATIP. But even more importantly than that, I think all indigenous people have lessons that we can learn from. I think we live in a very materialistic world that is heavily dependent upon technology. Indigenous people for millennia have gotten along just fine without it. Their sense of government and their sense of organization, their sense of fairness is truly profound. And I think if we can show the world just a little bit of that beauty, we might be better off. We might be better off as a civilization. We might be better off as a race, as a species. I'm not going to go into detail, but when I had the distinct honor of going up and meeting the chief and the elders of the bands, the Dakota bands, it was a profound experience for me. It was an epiphany. I learned so much in that brief time I had with them. It was nothing less than soul shaking, and I mean that sincerely. I realize there's a whole nother aspect to humanity that we have seemed to forget. And indigenous people have, despite the challenges they have faced, over the years, whether it's disease or being moved against their will to reservations, and the hardships and the discrimination that they have faced over and over again, somehow they were able to maintain their dignity and their humanity. For me, it was an understanding of resilience, and that there is an indelible part of the human being, whether you call it the soul or the id or the chi or whatever nom du jour you want to give it. There's an element beyond the biomass of a human body and beyond the electrical synapses of the human brain and the intellect that makes each and every one of us distinct. And I learned that there's great beauty in that. And coming from a hard investigator who has been always just a facts ma'am kind of guy, there's another aspect to being human here that not just me, but maybe other people have forgotten as well.